I've been an avid hiker for most of my adult life, but what happened on the Echo Trail in northern Minnesota last autumn has left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the wilderness. Even now, months later, my hands shake as I type this, knowing that someone else might encounter what I did. I had planned this solo trek for weeks, mapping out a 3-day journey through the remote Superior National Forest. The trail was known for its pristine lakes and dense pine forests, perfect for someone looking to disconnect from the world. The weather forecast promised clear skies and mild temperatures, ideal hiking conditions for late September. The first day went exactly as planned. I covered 12 miles, set up camp near a small lake, and even managed to catch a few brook trout for dinner. It wasn't until the second day that things started feeling wrong. It began with footprints, not animal tracks, but human footprints that seemed to appear alongside my own in the soft earth. At first, I dismissed them. Other hikers weren't uncommon, though I hadn't seen anyone else on the trail. But something about them was off. They matched my stride exactly, as if someone was walking in perfect synchronization with my steps. Even when I deliberately changed my pace or took unusual steps, the tracks would mirror mine precisely. By early afternoon, I started hearing what sounded like an echo of my movements, a twig snapping a split second after I stepped on one, the rustle of leaves just after I passed through them. I tried convincing myself it was just the wind playing tricks, but deep down, I knew better. The forest had become unnaturally quiet, with none of the usual birdsong or squirrel chatter. I decided to turn back early, not wanting to spend another night in the woods. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The mysterious footprints weren't just matching mine anymore. They were appearing slightly ahead of my own. As panic set in, I quickened my pace, then broke into a run. The echoing sounds grew louder, closer. I could hear breathing that wasn't my own, ragged and hungry, just behind my left ear. But every time I spun around, there was nothing there. Just more footprints, pressing into the earth before my eyes, as if made by invisible feet. The sun was setting when I finally reached the trailhead, my legs burning from running. I collapsed against my car, gasping for air. It took several minutes before I could steady my hands enough to unlock the door. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror. What I saw still haunts me to this day, a single set of footprints in the dirt lot, appearing one by one, walking away from where my car had been parked, heading back into the darkening forest. I've tried researching the Echo Trail since then, looking for similar stories. I found a local legend about shadow walkers, spirits that follow hikers, matching their steps perfectly before taking the lead and leading them astray. Most dismiss it as campfire folklore, but I know what I experienced. Sometimes at night, I still hear that echo of footsteps, even in my own home, always just a half step ahead of mine. I never should have gone hiking alone that day in Sedona, but as a wildlife photographer, I was used to solitary treks in search of the perfect shot. The weather was perfect that March morning. Crisp air, clear skies, and the famous red rocks glowing in the early sun. I had my camera gear, plenty of water, and a specific destination in mind, a lesser-known vantage point overlooking Cathedral Rock that I'd read about online. The trail started normally enough, winding through juniper trees and around massive sandstone formations. I stopped frequently to photograph interesting rock formations and a few desert flowers that were just beginning to bloom. About 2 miles in, I noticed something peculiar through my camera's viewfinder, what looked like cave openings high up in the cliff face that I couldn't see with my naked eye. Intrigued, I switched to my telephoto lens for a closer look. That's when I saw the first figure. It was barely visible, just a dark shape moving across one of the cave mouths. I quickly snapped several photos, thinking I might have discovered some rare wildlife. But when I reviewed the images on my camera's LCD screen, my excitement turned to confusion, then fear. The figure was humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. In each successive photo, it seemed to be looking more directly at my position, despite being hundreds of yards away. In the final shot, it was clearly facing the camera, though its features were obscured by shadow. I told myself it was probably just a trick of light and shadow, maybe combined with some pareidolia. But as I continued along the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I raised my camera to take another photograph, I found more of those figures in the background, each one closer than the last. They were never visible to the naked eye, only through the lens. The deeper I went, the more frequent they appeared in my photos. Sometimes lurking behind rocks, sometimes perched on cliff edges, but always staring directly at the camera. They seemed to be converging on my position, though I never saw any sign of them in real life. By the time I reached the vantage point, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the camera. I forced myself to take one final photo of Cathedral Rock. When I checked the image, my heart nearly stopped. The figures were everywhere, dozens of them, surrounding my position in a wide circle, all facing inward. And now, I could see their features clearly. Hollow black eyes, mouths stretched impossibly wide, skin like sun-bleached bone. I ran faster than I've ever run in my life, not daring to look through the camera again. When I finally made it back to my car, I was drenched in sweat and my legs were trembling. That night, after several stiff drinks, I forced myself to look through all the photos from the hike. They were all gone. Every single photo was normal, just rocks and desert vegetation. Except for one, the very first photo I'd taken that morning of the trailhead sign. There, in the background, barely visible, was a single figure. It was holding a camera, pointed right at me. I haven't gone hiking since then, and I've sold all my photography equipment. But sometimes, when I'm alone, I catch glimpses of movement in reflective surfaces. Tall, thin shapes that seem to be taking pictures of me. I never see them directly, only in mirrors, windows, and screens, and they're getting closer. The Appalachian Trail in winter is a different beast entirely. Most hikers stick to the warmer months, but I'd always loved the solitude and stark beauty of the snow-covered mountains. I'd done plenty of winter hiking before, so when I set out that February morning in the Berkshires, I felt well prepared. I had my winter gear, emergency supplies, and a detailed plan for a day hike to a shelter about 6 miles in. The temperature was hovering around 20 degrees Fahrenheit when I started, with light snow falling. The first few miles were peaceful, with my boots crunching through fresh powder and icicles glinting from tree branches. Around mile 4, the snow started falling harder, reducing visibility to about 50 feet. I considered turning back, but figured I could make it to the shelter and wait out the worst of the weather. That's when I found the first set of tracks, bare footprints in the snow, as if someone had been walking completely barefoot in the freezing cold. They seemed fresh, with crisp edges that hadn't been softened by the falling snow. More disturbing was their pattern. They weren't walking in a straight line, but weaving erratically, sometimes crossing over themselves. I pulled out my phone to document the tracks and maybe call for advice, but there was no signal. The snow was falling even harder now, and the temperature had dropped significantly. As I followed the trail, I kept seeing those bare footprints, and they were starting to show signs of frostbitten toes dragging through the snow. The wind picked up, carrying with it what sounded like distant crying. I told myself it was just the wind in the trees, but it became increasingly distinct, the sobs of a child echoing through the woods. I called out, thinking someone might need help, but my voice was swallowed by the swirling snow. The footprints were getting fresher, with small drops of blood now visible in them. The crying was getting closer too, though it seemed to come from different directions. Sometimes it was ahead of me, sometimes behind, sometimes from both places at once. The temperature had plummeted to well below 0, and my own feet were starting to go numb despite my insulated boots. Through the thickening snow, I spotted something dark against the white ground ahead. As I got closer, I realized it was a child's winter boot, frozen solid and partially buried. A few yards further, I found its mate, then a small coat, then mittens. A trail of discarded winter clothing, leading deeper into the woods, accompanied by those bloody, barefoot prints. The crying was very close now, just ahead in the white-out conditions. I knew I should turn back, but I couldn't leave knowing there might be a child out here. As I pressed forward, I noticed something odd about the footprints. They were getting smaller, as if whoever was making them was shrinking as they walked. Finally, through the curtain of snow, I saw a small figure, standing with its back to me, completely naked despite the lethal cold. "Hey!" I called out. "Are you okay?" The crying stopped abruptly. The figure slowly began to turn around, and I caught a glimpse of blue-white skin and black, frostbitten fingers. Before it could fully face me, my boot broke through what I thought was solid ground. I plunged into icy water up to my waist. I had wandered onto a partially frozen pond without realizing it. The shock of the cold water broke whatever spell had come over me, and I scrambled backward onto solid ground. When I looked up, the figure was gone. The snow had stopped suddenly, and the woods were absolutely silent. The footprints I'd been following had vanished as if they'd never existed. It took me 3 hours to backtrack to my car, moving as fast as I could through the deep snow. Later, I researched the area's history. In the winter of 1892, a young girl had gotten lost in these woods during a blizzard. They found her clothes scattered along a trail, as if she had been suffering from paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where hypothermia victims feel hot and strip off their clothes. Her body was never found. They say she still wanders the trail in winter storms, leading hikers astray with her crying. Some say she's looking for someone to share her fate, drawing them off the trail and into the deep woods where the cold can claim them too. I don't know if that's what I encountered that day, but I do know this. On particularly cold nights, I sometimes hear crying outside my window, and my feet go numb, as if remembering the touch of snow.